7 most hated towns in the Pacific Northwest. Some towns in the Pacific Northwest don't just get ignored, they get actively avoided. When people think about the Pacific Northwest, they picture misty coastlines, evergreen forests, cozy coffee shops, and that slow, peaceful lifestyle that looks amazing on Instagram. And to be fair, a lot of places here do live up to that image. But not all of them. In this video, we're counting down 7 of the most hated towns in the Pacific Northwest. Places that might look fine on the surface, but once you actually spend time there, you start to understand why people feel the way they do. If you like honest, unfiltered breakdowns of places people don't usually talk about, hit subscribe. Because on this channel, we don't sell the dream, we show you the fine print. Let's start with number 7. Number 7, Aberdeen, Washington. At first glance, Aberdeen feels like it should be one of those underrated coastal towns people are rushing to discover. It is close to the ocean, surrounded by dense forests, and housing prices look suspiciously affordable. You might wonder, why is this so cheap? You can still find homes here for prices that feel out of sync with the rest of Washington. For a moment, you might think you have found a hidden gem. Then you spend a day there. Aberdeen sits in Grays Harbor County with a population of around 17,000 people. It was once a major logging hub back when timber basically was the economy of the Pacific Northwest. But like a lot of single industry towns, when that industry slowed down, the ripple effects did not just hit. They stayed. You can feel that history everywhere. Driving through town, there is an uneven mix of life and decline. Some buildings look maintained, others feel like they have been waiting for a second chance since the early 2000s. It is not completely run down, but it is not thriving either. The town feels stuck in a long pause. The biggest complaint is the lack of opportunity. Jobs are not exactly overflowing, and many available ones are tied to industries without much growth. Younger residents leave, and the cycle keeps repeating. Then there is the weather. Aberdeen does not just get rain, it gets that constant, gray, heavy drizzle that feels like the sky forgot how to do anything else. Not dramatic storms, just endless, quiet dampness that slowly drains your motivation. The kind of weather where even your coffee feels tired. On top of that, there is a noticeable sense of isolation. You are not close to major urban centers, shopping options are basic, entertainment is minimal, and the overall pace of life feels stalled. To be fair, Aberdeen has access to genuinely beautiful natural areas. You are close to the coast, there are hiking spots nearby, and if you truly value quiet, there is a version of life here that works. It is just a very specific version. For most people, Aberdeen is not hated for one big reason. It is the accumulation of limited jobs, persistent gray weather, and a lingering sense of decline, all wrapped in a place that never quite recovered. Affordable? Yes. Peaceful? Sometimes. But for a lot of people, it is a hard pass. What is your least favorite town in the Pacific Northwest, and why? Let us know in the comments below, and it could become the topic for one of our future videos. Now on to number 6. Number 6, North Bend, Washington. North Bend looks like something straight out of a travel brochure. Mountains rise in the background. Dense evergreen forests, clean streets. The kind of place that makes you think, yeah, I could live here. Scenic. North Bend is located about 30 miles east of Seattle at the base of the Cascade Mountains with a population of around 8,000 people. Close enough to a major city, surrounded by nature and quieter than the urban chaos. On paper, ideal. But the geography comes with trade-offs most people do not think about until they are already there. The biggest issue is how physically boxed in the town is. North Bend sits in a narrow valley bordered by steep mountain terrain on multiple sides. That geography limits expansion, infrastructure growth, and basic accessibility. There are not many routes in and out, and when those get disrupted, everything slows down. The town is heavily dependent on Interstate 90, which acts as the main connection to Seattle. During normal conditions, it is manageable. During bad weather or peak commuting hours, it turns into a bottleneck that feels disproportionate for a town this size. And then winter shows up. Because of its elevation and proximity to the Cascades, North Bend experiences more extreme weather than nearby lowland areas. What might be a rainy day in Seattle can turn into a full snow situation here. Travel delays are not just inconvenient, they are expected. Snow, ice, even landslides from the surrounding slopes can interfere with daily life. Limited flat land is another issue. Because the town is surrounded by mountains and protected natural areas, restricted housing supply has pushed prices up significantly. You end up paying near suburban prices for a town that still deals with rural-level accessibility challenges. North Bend also sits in an area with high rainfall and steep terrain, which increases the risk of flooding and soil instability in certain zones. It is not constant, but it is a known concern during prolonged wet seasons. To be fair, this geography is not all negative. The same mountains that create isolation also create some of the best outdoor access in the region: hiking, skiing, and scenic drives. For people who prioritize nature above everything, North Bend can feel like a dream, just not an effortless one. Beneath the postcard visuals, this is a town shaped and limited by its geography. Beautiful, yes, but constrained, unpredictable, and inconvenient in ways you cannot really fix. Astoria looks incredible in photos. Perched along the Columbia River, historic buildings stacked on hillsides, ships moving through the water, it has that cinematic, almost European harbor town feel that makes people think they found a hidden gem. Geographically, it kind of is, but that same geography is also exactly where the problems begin. Astoria sits at the northwestern tip of Oregon, where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean. Population around 10,000. One of the oldest settlements in the western United States. On a map, it looks strategically placed. In reality, it is one of the most physically isolated small cities in the region. There is essentially one major way in and out, Highway 30, which snakes along the river to Portland, nearly 2 hours away. It is scenic, but it is not built for speed or reliability. Long stretches, limited passing zones, and frequent weather disruptions make it feel longer than it is. You are not just far from things, you are slowly far from things. Crossing into Washington requires the Astoria-Megler Bridge, which stretches over 4 miles. On a clear day, it is impressive. On a foggy, windy day, it feels like driving across a floating hallway with zero room for error. And that wind is no joke. Astoria is one of the windiest towns in the Pacific Northwest, with consistent heavy coastal winds, not occasional gusts. Combined with cold ocean air and constant moisture, the climate feels raw more often than comfortable. Then there is the fog, not the light cinematic kind. The thick, lingering kind that rolls in and stays, sometimes for days, muting visibility and making everything feel slightly disconnected from reality. The town is also built along steep hills that rise sharply from the waterfront, limiting expansion and creating infrastructure challenges. Roads are narrow and winding. Parking can feel like a puzzle, and certain areas simply are not designed for modern traffic. Then there is the issue less talked about: seismic risk. Astoria sits in the Cascadia subduction zone, one of the most significant earthquake zones in North America. Coastal towns like Astoria are particularly vulnerable, not just to shaking, but to potential tsunami impact on their low-lying waterfront areas. It is not a daily concern, but it is always in the background. Astoria still has undeniable appeal. The scenery is incredible, the history is rich, and the town has a personality that newer developments simply do not. For someone who values atmosphere and does not mind geographic inconvenience, it can feel unique in the best way. But living here means constantly working around the environment. The distance, the wind, the fog, the terrain, it is all part of the package. Beautiful? Absolutely. Easy to live in? Not even close. Number 4, Forks, Washington. Forks has one of the most recognizable names in the Pacific Northwest, not because of its economy or geography, but because of pop culture. The twilight setting brought waves of attention to a place most people would have otherwise never noticed. But once that attention fades, you're left with the reality of where Forks actually is. And geographically, it's one of the most isolated towns in the entire region. Forks sits on the western side of the Olympic Peninsula, surrounded by dense rainforest, far from major cities, with a population of just under 4,000 people. Technically close to the coast, but getting anywhere from here is not simple. There are no direct highways to major urban centers. Instead, you're relying on long, winding rural roads cutting through forest, hugging the coastline, or looping around the Olympic Mountains. Reaching Seattle isn't a straight drive, it's a multi-step process that can involve hours on the road and potential ferry crossings. You don't just go somewhere from Forks, you plan it. That isolation is reinforced by the terrain. The Olympic Peninsula is heavily forested with limited visibility and large stretches of completely undeveloped land. Infrastructure is sparse, no major road expansions, no alternate routes. What exists is what you get. If something goes wrong, road closures, storms, accidents, there aren't many backup options. Then there's the weather. Forks is one of the rainiest towns in the entire United States, not just the Pacific Northwest. It receives well over 100 inches of rainfall annually. Not occasional storms. Consistent, prolonged precipitation that shapes everything from road conditions to daily routines. The ground stays wet. The air stays heavy. Over time, that constant dampness starts to feel less atmospheric and more restrictive. Frequent rain combined with dense forest makes roads slick, drops visibility quickly, and turns maintenance into an ongoing challenge. Moss grows on everything, and even simple drives feel slower than they should. Forks is also close enough to the coast that Pacific storm systems arrive without losing much strength, bringing strong winds, heavy rain, and occasional flooding in surrounding areas. But here is the other side. This same geography makes Forks genuinely unique. The Olympic National Park is right there, rainforests, rivers, and coastline that feel almost unreal in their scale. For people who want to truly disconnect, Forks offers something very few places can: total separation. But for most people, that level of isolation isn't peaceful, it's limiting. The distance, the weather, the lack of alternate routes all add up to a place where geography isn't just a backdrop. It's the defining factor of daily life. Number 3. Coos Bay, Oregon. Coos Bay is the largest city on the Oregon coast, sitting right along a natural harbor with direct Pacific access. You would expect that positioning to create growth and connectivity. Instead, it creates a very specific set of geographic challenges that never really go away. The population is around 16,000, sitting roughly midway along Oregon's coastline. Unlike Astoria in the north or Brookings in the south, it does not benefit from proximity to major urban spillover. It exists in its own pocket. The biggest issue is highway access. The main route to inland Oregon is Highway 42, cutting through mountainous terrain toward Interstate 5. It is not fast. It is not straight. Long curves, elevation changes, and limited passing opportunities make it feel like a slow funnel rather than a real connection. Being directly on the Pacific means constant exposure to ocean-driven weather. Wind is a regular presence, not occasional or seasonal, but consistent. The kind that pushes against your car door when you open it. Fog rolls in frequently and can linger longer than expected. Even during calmer periods, there is a heaviness to the atmosphere that never fully lifts. The terrain surrounding the town limits how the city expands. Hills, forests, and water channels mean infrastructure works around the landscape instead of reshaping it. There is no clean grid, no easy expansion. Coos Bay also functions almost like its own contained system, far enough from Portland, difficult enough to reach, that it does not benefit from broader regional economic spillover. Fewer external inputs, fewer fast changes, fewer growth opportunities. And like much of the Oregon coast, Coos Bay sits within the Cascadia subduction zone. Coastal exposure combined with seismic potential adds long-term uncertainty that inland towns simply do not face. There is ocean access, wide coastal views, and a slower pace of life that some people actively seek. There is real space and quiet here. But for many people, that same separation feels like being cut off. The distance, the terrain, the weather, it all builds into a place where geography does not just influence life, it controls it. Number 2. Brookings, Oregon. Brookings feels like it's trying to exist in its own world, almost isolated from the rest of the region. Tucked into the far southwestern corner of Oregon near the California border, it has clearer skies, dramatic cliffs, and ocean views that stretch forever, so it almost feels out of place compared to nearby towns. And geographically, that is exactly the problem. With a population of around 6,500, Brookings sits along Highway 101. On paper, that sounds convenient, but Highway 101 in this part of Oregon is a winding, narrow coastal road that curves around cliffs and dips through forests. You are not traveling quickly, you are navigating. To reach Medford, the closest inland hub, you take Highway 199, cutting through the Klamath Mountains with sharp turns, elevation changes, and sections that feel more like a scenic route than a reliable connection. Travel times vary more than expected. Fog, rain, fallen debris, and minor disruptions can slow things significantly. There are no alternate routes. You have to work with what is there. Then there is the climate. Brookings is known for the Chetco effect, a localized weather pattern that brings unusually warm, dry air into the area at certain times. That same condition can rapidly increase wildfire risk in surrounding forests. Dry winds through steep terrain create an environment where fires can spread faster than expected, and the town's geographic position complicates response times and containment. At the same time, Pacific storm systems hit this region directly, bringing heavy rain, strong winds, and rough ocean conditions. Brookings sits between mountains and ocean, so weather patterns do not just pass through. They interact with the landscape in ways that can amplify their effects. You are always between two forces. Limited expansion potential compounds everything. Mountains on one side, ocean on the other. There's only so much room to grow. Housing availability, infrastructure development, and long-term planning are all constrained by the physical boundaries. That limitation shapes daily life. Brookings is undeniably beautiful. The coastline here is some of the most dramatic in the region. The weather can be surprisingly mild at times, and for people who want to feel completely removed from urban noise, it delivers fully. But living here means accepting that geography sets the rules. The roads, the terrain, the weather patterns do not adjust to you. You adjust to them. Number 1. Port Angeles, Washington. Port Angeles looks like it should be one of the best positioned towns in the Pacific Northwest. Sitting right on the Strait of Juan de Fuca with waterfront views, mountains behind it, and a ferry connection to Canada, on paper it feels like a strategic coastal hub. But geographically, it is one of the most constrained places on this entire list. Port Angeles has a population of around 20,000 and sits on the northern edge of the Olympic Peninsula. Once you are here, you are not just in a town. You are inside a geographic pocket. To the south, the Olympic Mountains, massive rugged terrain that cuts off any direct inland expansion or fast travel routes. No road goes straight through, everything goes around. To the north, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, a hard boundary that stops infrastructure cold. East and west, long stretches of highway wrap around the peninsula, following the coastline and bending with the terrain. Highway 101 is your lifeline, and it is not built for speed or redundancy. Getting to Seattle typically means combining highway travel with ferry timing, or taking a long loop around the peninsula that takes far longer than expected. You are constantly working with geography instead of moving through it. Port Angeles sits in a unique position, partially shielded by the Olympic Mountains, creating a rain shadow effect. It actually gets less rainfall than nearby Forks. But that same positioning creates unpredictability. Weather patterns shift quickly over short distances, and when systems move through the strait, wind becomes a real factor along the waterfront. You are dealing with overlapping environmental influences rather than one consistent pattern. The town is built between steep elevation changes and the waterline, which creates a physical ceiling on how it can grow or adapt. Expansion inland runs into mountains. Expansion outward runs into water. Port Angeles also experiences a form of regional isolation that is different from the other towns on this list. Places like Brookings or Coos Bay are far, but still part of linear coastal systems. Port Angeles sits on a peninsula that loops back on itself. Movement is circular. Everything routes around the same constraints. You do not pass through Port Angeles on the way somewhere else. You go there, or you do not. The ferry to Victoria, while useful, does not solve the problem. It adds another layer of dependency with schedules, conditions, and cross-border logistics. It works when everything aligns, which is not always the case. And here is what makes this complicated. Port Angeles is genuinely beautiful. The water, the mountains, the proximity to Olympic National Park, it is one of the most visually striking places in the region. It feels expansive, even when it is physically constrained. That is the paradox. Everything that makes it appealing, its position, its landscape, its separation, is also what makes it difficult. The terrain limits movement, the water limits expansion, the road network limits efficiency. It is not one problem. It is all of them working together. And that is why it lands at number 1. Not because it is the worst place, but because its geography quietly controls everything about it. Those were 7 Pacific Northwest towns that do not always live up to the image people expect. Some are isolated, some are weather-beaten. Some have geography that works against them in ways you do not notice until you are already there. That is the thing about this region. The beauty is real. But so is the fine print. If you enjoyed this kind of honest breakdown, subscribe. We have got a lot more places to uncover, and not all of them are what they seem.